All right, so now we are moving on to another video in section 3.2. I said that this section was going to be a lot of videos because a lot of different topics that need to be covered. And now we have our mid-range, right? So that's the next thing that we're going to discuss. First, we'll go through the definition, then we'll go through a couple examples. Each of these videos are going to be quite short though. All right, so our mid-range is defined by the sum of the lowest and highest values in a data set and then divided by 2. And what our mid-range gives us, it gives us a rough estimate of both our middle of our data, so of both the middle and also the average. So it's giving us a rough estimate of both our middle and our average. Now, sometimes with the data that we're given, the mid-range might not be necessarily good for us to use to think about what our middle of our numbers will be or what our average. And that's if we have one or two values that are very different than the rest of our information. Now, I'll show you what I mean by that in a couple of seconds. But just know that to find our mid-range, it's very easy. We are adding our lowest and our highest value and then just dividing by 2. And what this does is it gives us a rough estimate of where our middle of our data should be and where the average of our data should be. All right, so let's go ahead and do a couple examples. All right, so if we were to find our mid-range for here, we would then do our smallest number, which is 1, our largest number, which is 8, so 1 plus 8, and we would divide it by 2, so that is equal to 9 divided by 2, or 4.5. All right, so now if I asked you to find the median and also to find the average or the mean of this information, what we would have gotten for here, I guess I should have wrote this down underneath, but our median, if we were to solve for this, would be equal to 3.5, and our mean for this would be equal to 4. So if you see, by just finding this mid-range, it does give us a pretty close approximation of what our median and also of what our mean is. So it's a rough estimate of the middle of our information, middle of our data. So it's not exactly the same as the median. I'm not saying that this will give us our median because the median is actually the middle number. But it's just telling us where the rough estimate of the middle of our data is located and also what the rough estimate of our average could be. All right, but for this one, it gave us a pretty close representation because all these numbers are fairly close to each other. There's no outliers. There's not one number that is way different than the other. So now let's do our last question. All right, so if we were to ask to solve for the mid-range of this information, it will be 10 plus 34.5 divided by 2. So this is then equal to 44.5 divided by 2, or it's equal to 22.25. So our mid-range of this question that we did before about the NFL signing bonuses is equal to 22.25. Now remember, this is the rough estimate of where the middle or where the average of our data could be. But if you notice, there is one number here that is extremely different than everything else. 34.5 is way different than any of the other numbers that we have, so it could be considered an outlier. So if we were to find our median and our mean of this information, well, the median was equal to 11.85, and then the mean is equal to 15.025. So because we have this one outlier here, it's telling us that maybe our mid-range won't give us a very good estimate of our data. So unlike the last example that we had where everything was very close to each other, our mid-range was actually quite close to both our median and our mean. If we have an outlier, that's going to then change our information. So if we have one number that is way higher than the rest or way lower than the rest, it's going to then give us an inaccurate representation of our data. All right, that is it for this video.